So I think of feedback as a gift, right? That I'm actually having somebody, and I'm giving feedback, I'm effectively gifting them feedback. I think of it as a beautiful blue Tiffany's box with a lovely ribbon on top. And inside that box, there's a whole lot of packaging and a gift inside. When you give someone the feedback, they're going to not necessarily just take the gift and put it on the shelf and say thanks. They'll unpack the gift, they'll pull the ribbon, they'll lift the lid, they'll see the wrapping inside, and they still won't necessarily understand what's in the box until they start to work their way through it. So when we're giving feedback, if we can help people by working through the wrapping so that they can see the gem inside, they're more likely to receive it in a way that's positively minded, even if it's in conflict to the type of gift they'd otherwise want to receive.
How do you get 10,000 people to take a step to the left? What's behind the relentless mindset of a world champion? Why do teams of exceptional talent fail? How do you manage the pressure to perform? These are some of the curious questions we will attempt to answer as we bring you world leaders, curious minds, exceptional talent, successful CEOs, and incredible human beings who know how to inspire great leaders and are inspiring great leaders themselves. I am Craig Johns, high performance leadership expert, international speaker, and CEO of Speakers Institute Corporate and World Sport Coach. This is the Inspiring Great Leaders podcast, where the ordinary don't belong. Welcome to the Inspiring Great Leaders podcast. Our guest today is an executive coach and partner at Deloitte Australia, specialist in positive psychology, and the author of Be Your Own Leadership Coach. Our guest has a Masters of Science in Coaching Psychology and Masters of Laws from the University of Sydney, and a Bachelor of Economics from Macquarie University. She has over 32 years of experience in the professional services industry, including an impressive 23-year tenure as a partner at Deloitte Australia and R&D tax advisor at Michael Johnson Associates. Her passion also extends beyond the corporate world, generously volunteering her coaching skills to clients such as Dress for Success, International Coaching Federation, Expert Author Community, and Bumbuddha Group. I have the pleasure to bring you a phenomenal human being whose purpose and passion aligns with coaching women leaders towards sustainable long-term careers in business, loves normalizing the once taboo topic of menopause in the workplace, and is known for baking mouthwatering honey cakes in Sydney. Karen Stein. Karen, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much, Craig. Great to be here.
You're welcome. You're welcome. So you live in Sydney. I'm curious, where did you grow up and what was the big dream when you were racing around the playground?
Well, I did grow up in Sydney. I've spent most of my life in Sydney, actually. Some couple of years we lived in Canada for a while. My dad was an academic and he had a number of sabbaticals. So we were fortunate to go to school in the coldest parts of Canada for a few years. But other than that, it was Sydney. And my dreams were really about, I guess I've lived them out to some degree, but about helping people. I really wanted to be a family lawyer. Probably not so much in the young days when I was running around the playground, but when I was, a little bit older and kind of cool, sitting on the side, thinking about life, and, rather than playing with marbles at the earlier years, I started thinking about family law. How could I support people to work through challenges around family structures so that they could feel supported and they could move forward into having a positive life?
And now you seem very much like someone who has an absolute passion for learning, and obviously your dad is an academic. You've got a couple of masters, a couple of degrees as well. What was it about studying that you were fascinated by?
I've always had a love of learning. I just like the growth aspect that comes with it, and so it's just something, and I've had different, I guess, responses to different learnings I've had. So my most favourite of learning came with my Masters of Science in Coaching Psychology. I really felt I'd found my place. I felt I'd found my people and was able to get into the detail of the evidence base that comes from the field of positive psychology and really start to unpack how people think, how they feel, how they behave, how we could actually really be looking at the human side of supporting people so that they could be of their best. Quite away from economics, which was my undergrad degree, and my Masters of Law. To be frank, I did a law degree and I had thought about practicing law. I fell into the world of tax, and that Masters in Law I kind of looked at as a bit of an insurance policy. What if things didn't work out? Where would I take it? So I did that, and I remember going to the darkened rooms. I was studying it part-time on rainy nights, feeling pretty fatigued and tired, and not really feeling as energized as I did when I certainly had the learning experience with positive psychology. So I think it's that growth curve that you go on when you actually find that you're opening your mind to something and you're curious about it and building out your perspective and your insights and your knowledge and taking you beyond where you are to greater appreciate and understand the world around you. That's what I enjoy most about learning.
And your dad being an academic, and what was your dad's best advice when it come from learning and approaching the world?
Well, that was kind of funny. Mum was a teacher, so it was very much an academic household. In fact, my father was an economist, and he was at Macquarie University where I did my economics degree, and I was present in his lectures while he was lecturing everybody. And I knew him as my dad, not as Professor Stein standing at the front of the room and throwing people out when they were, mucking up in class. So I guess I kind of looked at it as dad teaching and doing his thing. And, he'd sometimes bring jokes to the examples he'd give. So when he was giving examples of an economic concept, he might use a nickname of myself or my brother or something to have the characters in this example, which of course would make me giggle, and my friends who knew me and everyone else would be writing this down in their notes as to the names of these things. He was always very supportive. We had a bit of a laugh when I finished my economics degree when I told him now that I too was an economist, and he knew how I'd studied or how I hadn't studied and how I'd got myself through my degree. It certainly wasn't with the due interest and care that he had, but I thought it was a good place to start. I wasn't quite sure how I'd move into law. I had been quite a playful student in my high school days, and I hadn't really applied myself as best as I had. So when I finished my high school certificate, I didn't have the marks that I wanted to have to walk straight into law. So I did my economics degree, and I started to thrive and started to really learn how to study, which I hadn't learned so well for the earlier years. And that's when I then transferred in to do my law degree, and then started to realise what a pleasure it was.
Beautiful. I love that. Did you ever challenge the professor?
Outside of the classroom, like I knew where he could take things. I didn't want to be the butt of his jokes. No, so I used to have a bit of fun and games with him and tease him, when we'd go home. And it was such a privilege. You don't often get to be in front of your parents when they're in their profession, when they're doing their thing, and when they're being the professional selves they are and what they're bringing to their profession. So seeing him masterfully teach, and he always had, significantly positive reviews in his teaching. I was always very proud of him, and he was very accessible, very approachable. And even to this day, when I've met people who put the dots together and realised that was my father, I'm very proud to say that he was held in high regard. So it wasn't just this family bias coming through. But it was nice. It was a real honour to be able to see him live out what he was doing and me to witness it and be a part of it.
Yeah, you're 100% right. It is very, very rare that you get to be a part of, I suppose, not being a colleague of your mum or dad, actually being the client, so to speak. That's very, very rare. So it's a beautiful experience for you. It's kind of like, I suppose, for me when I was being an athlete and dad was coaching our field hockey teams, and in some respect, I mean, for him, it wasn't his main profession, although he's very, very good at what he did. For him, it was more the volunteer on the side and did it from a passion perspective. But, you're always balancing that respect for this is my parent, but also, I'm here to be the student or the client, so to speak, at the same time. Yeah.
He had to have his colleagues mark my papers, of course. So there was no conflict of interest. Probably worried him, wondering how I was going to go.
How you were going to get through. Which is good. So you spent a bit of time, working in taxes, etc. as well. Yeah. What was the shift to sort of move into Deloitte, and what was kind of were you still doing tax when you first started at Deloitte?
Yeah. So as I mentioned earlier, I had an interest in family law. So in finishing my law degree, I had been moved by some of the work I'd done during my degree with Kingsford Legal Centre and started to actually work on individual cases and understand the impact you could have with people. I went to the College of Law in Sydney to gain my practicing certificate to become a solicitor. And in those days, there was no computers with seek.com to find jobs. There was lots of billboards, lots of adverts stuck all over these billboards. And I plucked an advert from it, rung them up, got myself an interview and rocked up assuming that they were a practicing law firm. I discovered they weren't. They were a small boutique consulting firm and they specialised in the research and development tax incentive. And we did an interview. They offered me a job, which was kind of surprising. I figured I'd stay for 6 months and get a real job, but I stayed for 7 years and I absolutely loved it. And it was very purposeful work, helping businesses seek funding to further their research and development to the benefit of the Australian economy. But after 7 years, I thought it would be nice to be elsewhere. And we all knew each other in the field of R&D tax in Australia. And I liked the guys at Deloitte. I thought they'd be great to work with. So I simply asked them for a job. They didn't have a job at the time, but they did have a corporate tax partner who took me under his wing, and I worked with him for a short while. And then I was transferred back into the R&D taxes team, and the journey went forward to become a partner of the firm a short time later. So I had a career as a partner for some 16 years in tax, and really enjoyed the opportunities that came with it, the clients that I worked with, multinational clients as well as local organisations and great teams. And I learned a lot from them as well as tried to build and impress upon them different elements as a leader myself in leading those teams. But as I tell people, I was getting closer to my halfway point. I was getting closer to 50 and I'm determined to live to 100. And I realised that R&D tax was not going to shine for me for chapter 2 of my life. And I wanted to do something more impactful, which takes you back to that family law piece. I wanted to help people. And I'd realised I was helping corporations, but I really still wanted to come back to the individual. So it was close to that time I'd been on a leadership program myself, and I'd been given a coach, and I fell in love with the process of coaching. I really started to distinguish between what a coach was, what a mentor was. I was fascinated by the process of coaching, so I went and did a certificate in coaching practice. That felt a little bit lightweight. I wanted to go deeper, so that's where I found the master's program and started to do that. And then an opportunity came up to move into an executive role within the business, and I started to coach some people then. And I finally shaped a program which I offered to the firm where I'd leave tax altogether. As I say, hang up my tax boots and deregister as a tax agent, so never to return. And I moved into our talent team to start coaching our women partners across Australia. So I did that in 2016. And it's been a privilege to have this career pivot, to have this role within Deloitte, and to be in service to the many women partners that I support in their careers.
Yeah, we've interviewed the likes of Alan Derrick on the podcast before,
fabulous.
who I'm sure you've spent quite a bit of time with. And it's wonderful to see the kind of empowerment we've seen with women partners and leaders inside Deloitte. I think it's fantastic, the global kind of movement in the way that it's been done. Yes. And I know, with the likes of Alan and other people who are kind of really sponsoring those initiatives and supporting them, it really helps to see an organization thrive.
It does, and bring attention to it and support those in the workplace so that they can be of their best. It's a terrific contribution that they're making towards the fullness of the workforce.
Yeah, very good. So for those who are listening, I mean, because we hear the words mentoring, we hear the words coaching. In your words, how would you describe what each is and what is the difference between the two?
They are quite distinct and they're often used interchangeably, but a coach is somebody who sits with you and explores and reflects and discovers with you options towards the goals that you might have, or helps you identify obstacles or barriers towards those goals. So they almost act as a reflective frame to help you grow your self-awareness so you can be more understanding of your behaviours, your emotions and cognitions, and be more informed to make choices towards the impact or the goal that you'd like to have. So it's very much a process, a collaborative process of exploration. Mm-hmm. Lots of questions are asked. It's really a questioning frame. A mentor, on the other hand, is coming at you with advice. So you'll seek a mentor because of their lived experience or their professional experience. And you might pose a problem you have, or you might question how I reach a goal, and you'll ask them to tell you what to do. And so they're going to tell you, as very different to question you, but tell you what to do based on how they would tackle it, how they would have handled it in the past. So it can be really interesting and informative to hear what would work for them and maybe think about how I could apply that for me. What I'm challenged with sometimes with mentoring, though, is we're all such different people. Sometimes somebody else's approach might not match my needs. It could be that we have different ways of seeing the world, different communication styles, different levels of confidence, different networks, or different ways of dealing with problems and emotional constraints around those. And that then, I think, helps us when we think, no, I wouldn't do what they're suggesting. That's a real nice coaching moment, because you can take that and say, well, what is it about that I might explore to see why I wouldn't lean into that? Is it that I'm lacking in confidence because of A, B, and C? Or is it that the way I communicate isn't clear in my messaging and I need to work on that? Or maybe I over-communicate. What is it? So you can use both. And I do suggest that people build what I refer to as your own personal board of directors, where you have a coach, you have a mentor, you also have an advocate. And an advocate goes further. They actually help identify opportunities for you and pull you through towards those opportunities. They might champion your name when you're not in the room, connect you to their network, and absolutely support you. And likewise, you'll support them with reaching their goals. So it's a two-way street in relation to that. And the last person I'd have in that personal board of directors is what I refer to as a reciprocal mentor, somebody who perhaps is junior to you, who can see the world differently to you, and who is able to bring to your attention different ways of doing things or seeing things, which can, I guess, open up and explore more for yourself in how you might solve a problem.
So we're talking about, we've got an advocate, we've got a reciprocal mentor, we've got a mentor, we've got a coach. Where does teaching fit into this? Where does a teacher? Is that when you go more from one-to-one to a group, like facilitating, or does it have a place as well within inside an individual?
Oh, it absolutely has a place, but I wouldn't necessarily have them as in your personal board of directors, because I think you're seeking those people more regularly for support and advice. Whereas a teacher, I think you'd go to learn a skill or learn something in particular, which would be additive to that framework. And also some of those people are going to be teaching you along their journey too. So absolutely, you'll be learning from your mentors. You might even find your coaches are teaching you particular skills and coaching you on particular skills. So it's kind of, at times, there's an overplay of both.
Is there a place for an agitator? You know, someone that will play devil's advocate, who will challenge you from different perspectives. Like for me, I've always found that the people that have pushed me the most have been those who agitate me, make me feel a little bit angry. I don't get so good when people get too cozy and dress things up to make it feel good.
Well, I don't think that a coach or a mentor necessarily has to make it feel good. So I think they can agitate you too. So, a coach can do so with the type of question that they ask you. They can be agitating you in terms why it's of importance to you or why it's not of importance, or what are the patterns that they're noticing in your behaviors, emotions, and cognitions. It might feel a bit challenging and uncomfortable when you hear it. They can bring to your attention things that you're not saying. So what's not being said that they're noticing, that they can agitate and bring that forward. And likewise with the mentor, they can absolutely tell it as it is. I see you doing this and that's not right, or I'm not in agreement with that approach. How do you feel about that? So you can have that, again, threaded through those relationships, as opposed to going just to an individual simply to perform that role.
When we look at, say, human beings who have gone into the corporate world, they have trained as an economist. Let's say the economist, right? They've trained as an economist. They've been through university. They've gone into a job as an economist, and they're a great specialist. They're a great technician of economics. Yeah. And then one day they get tapped on the shoulder, and they said, "Okay, next week on Monday, you are leading a team of 10. Congratulations. We look forward to seeing you on Monday." And they dive on Monday, and we've seen this many, many times, and it still occurs many, many times every single day, where this person either falls into the trap of I need to be amazing. Like I need to know everything because everyone's going to be looking at me, and I don't want to be found out as a fraud, as though I don't know what I'm doing. Or you get those who simply will just struggle. They will get lost. And then you find those who go, you know what, this is a great opportunity to bring everyone else alive because they have skills I don't. So let's support them. And you might get those people that kind of flounder along the way. What is the role of organizations at this juncture of someone's career?
I think there's a big role to be played because when we're actually giving people an opportunity, I think we need to be supporting them with that opportunity. So we want people to succeed and grow. We don't want to be giving people opportunities where we're throwing them into the fire and leaving them to see what happens. It's really about equipping them, whether it's with skills, whether it's conversation, whether it's support of having a team around you, resources that might be on hand, whether it's technology or other initiatives to help and support you. So it's understanding what's the expectation of the role. I think it's important, and often that's spoken to, or if you're moving from one level to another in an organisation, typically there's an understanding of what does that look like, what's expected of me in this new role, what are the strengths I need to bring, the skills I need to bring. I think within organisations, if you can have a coaching culture, as we do, it's also very helpful because people can support you through that. You have a coach that you can be working with who can help you identify what are your strengths and how you can bring them to this new opportunity. So what are the things which energize you and motivate you and inspire you? And what have you used in the past which has helped you have success that might be relevant to be using now? And how could they actually take you on this journey towards the problem that you now have to solve? I think when people do it in isolation, that's when it's challenging because we don't have as broad a perspective as we could possibly have. So from a systems point of view, we're only seeing that one small dot in the system, which is me. And I really need to be able to lift myself up to see more of the system and all of the interconnecting parts and start considering, what's emerging through the changing dynamics. Where am I moving to? How fast am I going? How slowly have I lagged behind? What's happening with the people around me to be more informed to the decisions that I'm going to be making in that new role? And so if we can open people's minds to more system thinking, to be able to understand what's happening around them, what are the influences, who are the influencers, it's a what and who. What are the conversations to be had? What's the quality of the conversations that we're having as well? And how is that helping the system or how is it not? I think people can then have a greater opportunity to grow and to fashion and shape that role to bring the best of themselves. And it's really important that they are focusing on themselves. How can you be the best of you as opposed to how can I mimic somebody else and try and be just like Craig? And if I try and be just like you, it's going to feel inauthentic and uncomfortable. And I don't speak like you. I don't think like you. I don't see the world like you. And as much as I might want to emulate your success, it's never going to be my success. So I sometimes do see that when people move into roles, they think, aha, so-and-so is great. I'll just do what they do. And they find it really clunky and uncomfortable. And they get a bit disengaged when they're not having the success that they see of someone else. And so if people can come back to themselves to understand their own values, which values do you want to honour in this role? What are your strengths? What's your purpose? What actually is it that you're trying to achieve? So what are the goals and what's going to motivate you towards achieving those goals? Then you're much more likely to enjoy it and be engaged, purposeful, and be more motivated to find out different ways of achieving what you've been asked to do.
It's interesting, we're talking about your personal board of directors there as well, think about who they are. To me, though, it depends. Like you talked about, we talked about teaching earlier. To me, it depends on what stage you are in your career. The earlier on, the more you actually need a teacher. And especially in these instances, unless we've got someone who can teach us, or we've got a company that is providing programs to teach us, or we've got someone, it could even be ourselves going, hey, you know what? I need to study a master's in management or something like that before I even get to those situations. But we've got to teach someone first because they don't have any experiences around leadership. Going into coaching mode sometimes doesn't always serve them because they may not have the experiences on it. It's like we deal with an amazing company in Australia and we're helping them with a graduate program and they want stuff around negotiating. Well, they're only 1 or 2 years in. So yes, they've had some examples of negotiating, but not high level negotiating in a corporate setting. And, to even things like whether they get really, really, could be complex or quite intense negotiations. So what we did there is to actually bring in some more experienced people in the organization to come into that program, because if we left those young ones alone, they just wouldn't, the teaching alone would not give them enough perspective to gain as much out of that program as they possibly could, even though we know the skills to learn at a graduate level would be amazing to have that. They just don't have the experience yet. So I suppose my question is here, the role of training and teaching from a leadership perspective in organizations needs to start well before those people actually go into leadership roles.
Absolutely. Yes. When I'm thinking of a coach, I'm thinking of the one-on-one as opposed to coaching a collective, which, would be group coaching or team coaching. And in the coaching, the coach can actually be questioning with the individual, where are you up to in terms of the skills? What are the skills that you need to build? Who's going to be in support of you? Who in the organization do you need to tap into or team with, or which learning program can you register for, or whatever it might be? So I was thinking of it more from a one-on-one coaching kind of individual basis. But yes, I agree. We do need to teach skills to help people lead throughout their career. And importantly, when I think of leadership, in my writing, I actually talk about the differences between different types of leadership. When we badge ourselves as leaders and only want to be a leader if we have a certain title, that's more about positional leadership. Whereas I believe everybody has great capacity to be a leader. As soon as you walk in as a graduate, you can start to demonstrate your own leadership, how you show up every day, how you contribute, how you're planful, how you lead and role model in the way that you conduct yourself. That's all role modeling to your peers, to other people. So once we start to recognize we're beginning in each step we take to build our leadership skills in terms of thinking about other people, connecting, building our listening skills, communication skills, we can then have the requisite programs to advance us even further, to build on that. So the negotiation skills, for instance, how do we build on that further? And the larger organizations, I'd suggest, tend to have either in-house or external programs that they bring in, or they might have coursework that people can access, whether it's virtual or otherwise, to try and scrub up in areas where they feel they need support. But I still think a coach is really helpful to help you realize that you need support. Because if I'm just attending a program to tick a box to say I was in attendance, so you can mark it off to say that I was there, but mentally I don't have an understanding that perhaps my listening skills do need some work. Perhaps I'm not necessarily present when I'm sitting with my team or my manager or my client, and I'm not really listening because I'm distracted or I've been selective in what I'm listening to. If I don't work out my needs, and for that, I'm going to participate in a very different way. It'll be very cursory as opposed to necessarily connecting with and giving meaning to why I'm having the training in the first place.
When I look at coaching or whether it be mentoring or let's say learning as a space, that growth mindset, the ability to learn and grow, one of the biggest things or challenges that I noticed moving into corporate space from a high performance sport background was feedback loops. Being in sport for many years, or probably pretty much 3 decades, or over 3 decades is involved in sport, where there's an extremely tight feedback loop.
Yes.
Like it is happening not only from the coach, but the other players. It is extremely tight. When you move into the corporate world, in some cases, non-existent. In some cases, the feedback loop is 12 months, which is too late, as we know, right? What are you actually helping someone with after 12 months worth of collecting something based on 1 or 2 moments that you may have seen or observed or someone's told you about? So is it actually a full picture? Now we're seeing, some better feedback loops. But, when we look at executive coaching, it's not accessible for everyone because of the cost. It's not accessible inside every organization because maybe the size of it, maybe the way they prioritize where expenses go, based on how do we get a return on investment for our people here. And that importance of having the accountability, having someone who can ask you the right questions is so important. So how do we create, firstly, more opportunities for people to be coached internally inside an organization? And then secondly, is there another way?
Yeah. I might jump to the is there another way and then come to the first part of the question, how do we create more opportunities? Because I think the way I see it is, and you refer to accountability, is that you're quite right. Not everybody can access a coach. Logistically, it's not always possible. You might have a coach, but you've got defined coaching sessions. They've come to an end. They're not sitting with you whilst you face into the challenge. And maybe you just didn't have a coach allocated to you in the first place. And also, yes, financially, you might not have the discretionary spend to be able to pay a coach. So my view is that we can increase the equity of access to coaching strategies by building up self-coaching, building up people's self-coaching muscles so that they can be in support of themselves to be their best self. And in when I do attend to a coach or have a coach with me, I'll have a much more nuanced conversation because I'll know myself even more so. I'll know myself much better. I'll be aware of my behaviors, my emotions and cognitions. I'll be aware of what's helping me and what's hindering me and the patterns that come with that. So the first thing I think we should be doing is teaching more people the art of self-coaching. How do I build my self-coaching muscle? And typically people these days are so busy, they're not making space to prioritize themselves and look after themselves and use that self-coaching muscle. And the same way I say, you could think about it in sport. If I was to, want to improve my speed in doing a lap around the oval, if I did it once, I'm unlikely to actually have success. I need to be continuously training. It's the same with self-coaching. I can't just do one thing once and expect that I've built a new habit or I'm seeing the world differently or I've grown my perspective. I need to actually start to make space for that for myself. So that's what I ask people to do, is actually pause and make space, find some time to have some self-reflection so you can stand outside of yourself and look at yourself as a third party would and notice what you see of yourself in terms of your behaviors, emotions, and cognitions. And then step into the second part of self-coaching, which is now to self-assess. What do I notice? What are the assumptions I'm holding, which could be self-limiting in terms of my thinking? Or maybe they're pushing me forward at pace. I'm, jumping in before I should. Or what are my relationships like? How am I building out relationships? What are the behaviors I'm bringing forward that are in support of my impact? What are the ones that might be distracting, and so on? And from there, I can move to the third stage, which is then going into experimentation or action. What can I design to try and build that muscle to allow myself to try some things, to try things differently, to notice different things? And that's where those feedback loops come in, because part of it in the self-coaching is building out my own self-awareness, which is a feedback loop. I'm becoming more intentionally minded, more noticeable of who I am, what I stand for, what are the values that I'm honoring or not, what are the strengths I'm using or not. What is the purpose I'm moving towards or lack of? And so with all of this additional self-awareness, I'm actually building up a feedback loop for myself. But the unfortunate thing is we're going to have some blind spots, just as we have when we drive a car. And I need to tilt my head and try and alter my perspective to see what is it I'm about to bump into? What's the damage that's going to be caused because of these blind spots? And that's where I can actually reach out to other people to seek feedback, to actually find some trusted people in my organization, whether it's my coach or whether it's team members or people I'm reporting into, to help me see those blind spots, to complete that feedback loop. So it's actually a continuum of feedback from myself and from others, so I can start to grow even further. And people aren't great at always giving feedback. As you said, it could take too long. So I can actually help them by framing things for them, by going to them more readily and saying, hey, you saw me present today. Can you give me some feedback about how that landed? What do you think worked well? And how could it have been even better? And if you're giving people a frame, they're more likely to be able to provide you with that constructive feedback. But if you just say, hey, do you have any feedback for me? And they'll go, no, you were great. Just keep doing what you're doing. You've learned nothing. So, what is it that I did that I should keep doing? I'm kind of in the dark. So I want you to mine the feedback. I want you to dig through that darkness, keep digging and asking more and more questions until you get to that gem that's shining further down. And then you can use that gem to be more informed and more understanding of what should I do that I should do more of, and what should I do that I could do differently. So that's kind of, I guess, the first part of the question. How we do it differently in terms of giving people coaches. It's tricky. It's tricky because coaches, if we've got a coaching culture, we can try and accommodate that by teaching more of the organization what it means to coach. and helping them understand the difference between mentoring and coaching. So they're not simply telling their teammates what to do, but they're sitting there and exploring with them and helping that person grow in that exploration. But the cost of actually having an internal coach or an external coach available for every team member would be exorbitant, and it just wouldn't be practical. So it's more likely to occur if people are advancing or maybe transitioning into a new role, or maybe they're on a particular leadership program, or maybe they're at a stage of their career where it's been identified that they could have some more support to help them have the different impact to the current impact they're having.
Yeah, when I look at really successful people in this world, I have a good example that's going to debunk this in a way, is you never see them do it on their own. No one ever achieves anything successful on their own. They have other people around him.
Yes.
There is one interesting instance where the type feedback loop was self in sport, and that was the guy who's just run the fastest marathon in the world. He's only done 3 marathons and he went 2 hours and 36 seconds or something like that.
Was that with those fabulous new shoes?
Oh, they all have fabulous new shoes, but he did it with zero. He's never had a coach.
Ah, okay.
Never had a coach. And so without diving in deeper to find out what support network was around him from parents or other people who may have been a role model, who may have given some level of guidance, it might not have been purely around running, but it may have had an impact on his mindset. Or now, is it sponsors or other people that are kind of coming to the fore that aren't considered as a specific coach, but may be helping this person. So it's extremely rare.
And there's science behind that too. There's lots of trials and studies in the field of positive psychology which show that people who have a coach and a mentor will advance at a faster rate than those who don't. They'll also be paid at a higher rate than those who don't, particularly those who also have an advocate. So there's been some very interesting studies around that.
Yeah, because my experience watching people who self-coach, and I've seen this many times, both in the corporate and both in sport, corporate, etc., is unless they have a very good framework around them. So that's one thing. They need a really good framework. But secondly, they actually need the right mentor approach. And some people just don't have it naturally until someone draws it out of them, maybe, or maybe they don't quite have it there internally to look after themselves. So, it's like self-paced learning. I watch a lot of these companies that go, all right, we're going to have this online learning platform where you can choose your own adventure and you can learn whatever you like. Right? Yeah. Great. That's going to apply to about 5% of people. I'm just throwing out a number here, but it's going to be pretty low who are actually going to use it and actually apply it properly and reflect on it and to actually grow and evolve. Probably, 95% are going to look at it and go, this looks like a Chinese takeaway menu. I'm overwhelmed by the selections of this. I don't know where to start. And within 1 or 2 weeks, they've kind of switched off and they're just ticking the box to say to the boss, hey, you know what? I've actually learned this, but really they haven't. So I know you've got 12 practices and I'm really keen to find out the structure you have with your self-coaching. So people not only to start this, but actually keep the momentum going on this, because we all know consistency and momentum is the key to success. And if you're not motivated by something and you're not sticking to something, then just because you started doesn't mean it's a good thing for you.
Yes, agreed. And nobody can be forced to self-coach. It has to be something that you choose to do. But I'm hoping that the structure that I give in the book actually is in support of those who are wanting or interested in advancing their self-coaching muscles, building them further. So the intention of the book is to provide you with 12 strategies, 12 practices that you can use for self-coaching. The first 7 are focused on you. How can you be your best or better self? And so how can you tap into understanding more of yourself than you actually thought you could have? And we actually will find that there's a lot we don't know about ourselves until we stop and realize more. A lot of realization when you do self-coaching, a lot of awareness grows. So initially it's looking at leading yourself in terms of identifying the values that you'd like to honor as you go through your career. So there's exercises throughout the book. So each chapter actually comes to you with stories which help you understand the context of each of the different topics. It's based evidence-based, so it's not heavily theoretical in the way it's written, but it is got an evidence base behind it. And then each chapter has self-coaching strategies within it. So you have self-reflective exercises, coaching strategies that you can adopt and try and build those muscles in relation to each topic, whether it's how do I set my goals and what kind of goals I should set. How do I motivate myself, which is precisely what you asked. So how do I move from something I feel I have to do to something maybe I should do? Maybe I'd actually like to do it. Oh, gosh, now I suddenly love doing it because I've been able to move my way through the different stages of motivation to see what I needed to bring and how I needed to bring my mindset or alter my mindset in regard to it. We move through to understanding how I use my time and manage my energy. So what am I doing for myself in terms of my commitments to a number of things, what's in my control, what's not. We use self-determination theory to try and help people build up their ability to have their own self-belief and self-worth, which comes through the self-coaching, and that's kind of sewn through the whole book. And then once we actually feel that we have built ourselves up to be of our better or best self, we can then bring that to how we lead others as our better or best self. So the last 5 strategies are really the impact that you have on others. What's the leadership impact you'd like to have? So how do you actually become more attentive to how you're seen? How are you visible? What are the perceptions that people form as a result? What are the behaviours that you exhibit? And how do you build trust with people so you can have that impact? And then how do you use your listening skills? How do you consciously communicate? And my favourite chapter being how do you bring kindness into leadership? Because I think we can absolutely dial that up significantly to allow people to have a much more enjoyable experience when they're in the workplace.
Okay, good. Before we dive a bit more into that kind of coaching, I think one of the things that I've noticed recently too is for someone who's kind of feeling like they're now moving closer to a leadership role, about to step into a leadership role, maybe even are in a leadership role, and I'm talking titles a little bit more here now, because we all know everyone is a leader because you're either leading them up the garden path or you're leading them down the wrong one, whatever it is. But we all have influence over people. So, but I feel there's a lot of confusion out there. You know, we must be an authentic leader. No, we must be a strategic leader. No, you must be a conscious leader. No, you have to be a kindness leader. No, you need to be a authoritative leader. And so there's so many, it's like messaging sometimes, it's just coming at you at 100 miles an hour and you're like, which road do I take? And I'm sure you're similar to me. We need all those components, and you will use all those types of leadership and command and control. You still need that at certain points. So how, when people are looking at self-leadership, how do they identify which areas of leadership they've got to develop? Because they might naturally already be really, really good at being kind and leading with kindness. They might already be someone who is very, very good at compassion and being conscious. But they may lack the areas of strategic leadership and being able to deal with challenging situations.
So how you identify that is through feedback loops. So part of it is building up your own self-awareness to see more of yourself and to see the impact that you'd like to have against the impact you're having. So what do you notice of yourself? If I'm pulling away from conflict because I'm sugarcoating everything, because I want everyone to feel that I care about them and that I'm in there for their best interests, and I'm really avoiding those hard conversations, I'll know it. I'll be able to feel it. I'll know that it's awkward to lean into conflict. And I'll have to start considering through my self-awareness, how is this helping and supporting the individual? How is it helping and supporting me? Perhaps in me not giving them feedback, it's adding to my workload because I'm doing more, fixing up more mistakes that they've done, or taking on more so that they can, turn their attention to other things without criticizing them or asking them to look at things differently. Maybe my team's also looking at me poorly, thinking you're just not dealing with a problem. So they're losing respect in me because they're waiting for me to lean into the conflict and they're watching it play out and they're never seeing any action from me. So I need to build up my own self-awareness to understand which parts of me are coming up, which parts of me do I need to bring to have the impact that I'd like to have, and then I need to complete that feedback loop I was talking about before, because maybe I can't see it. Maybe I think I'm being fabulous in the way I'm giving feedback, but others are noticing that, no, it's not very effective. So how do I have those trusted people around me who can observe me, and who I can lean into to say, hey, I don't really feel like I'm having the impact I'd like to have. I'm not advancing the team at the rate I hoped, or we're not achieving the results as a collective that I hope we would, or we're not broadening our perspective because it seems to be a lot of groupthink. We don't seem to be able to move away from the status quo. Everyone's pulling that way. I don't seem to be able to influence the team to come this way. What do you see in me? Which parts of me are showing up? What do you suggest that I also turn my attention to? So unless we're actually building out our self-awareness, we're unable to say, should I have, more authority in the way I lead? Should I be leading more from the heart? What should I be doing? We actually need to stand, get out of the detail of what we're doing day to day with people and move up above to the balcony and look down to see, well, what's the bigger picture I can now see? And what can I take away from that? And if I can't see it, what are other people who are on the balcony seeing of me below that maybe they can lift my attention to so I can make those choices?
Okay, so how do we avoid bias, right? So there's a couple of different research papers out there who say we have anywhere between 3,600 and 60,000 thoughts per day, right? So no one actually knows yet, I don't think, because there's a massive difference. But we know there's a lot of thoughts. And, there's research suggesting that 95% of our thoughts are repetitive. There's also research out there showing that 90% of people have a negative thought bias.
Yes.
Right? So they have more negative thoughts than they have positive, which is really scary and to me quite sad, like to hear that. And obviously that's based on experiences, and then obviously as momentum kicks in, if they're not aware of it, then they're going to end up with more negative. However, human beings, from what I understand, and I can't quote you the exact research, is somewhere around 90% of people, 95% of people will speak in positive bias. So internally they're thinking negative, but they'll speak more positively. And so if the bias is more negative in their thought process, how can they objectively be able to analyze themselves and have awareness of themselves to make the right decisions or to actually really understand themselves? And I know you've got your board of directors, but let's just stay internally here. How do we identify the biases in there to prevent ourselves from focusing either on the negative too much or having blind spots that we can't see? Or do we just need that personal board of directors to unleash those, because we're not going to see them anyway?
No, I think we have our own need to actually try and look inward to see what we see of ourselves before we rely completely on that board of directors to bring everything to our attention. I think that gets a bit lazy if we're waiting for everyone to come into this role and coach me, and then you tell me what you see of me, and you then pull me through. Well, where's my thinking? And so I need to have personal accountability for what I can do to try and build and grow and learn from myself as well. And so there's an important part of us absolutely trying to open our perspective, push open our cognitive boundaries so that we can see much more and have many more elements, data points of knowledge coming in to us so that we can consider the inferences we're making from the data that we've observed, and how are we actually just limiting it to small samples? What can we do to be more expansive of our thinking? So if I'm wanting to be cognizant of my bias, I need to hold a curious mindset. I need to be more open to understanding context and purpose and understanding difference and being curious and interested and listening, building my listening skills. So I'm not selectively listening just to confirm my own thoughts, but actually sitting with no judgment to try and understand more, which is very challenging. It is challenging, no doubt, because we're working at pace. We all want to get things done really, really quickly. So it's so easy if you've already formulated half your answer to go, it's exactly what I needed to hear. And you hear people say that all the time. That's just what I wanted to hear. And then they go off and, great, you've confirmed what my thinking was. Well, maybe they're not. You just haven't given them time to show you more. So we need a little bit of patience. We need to slow down and open ourselves up to understand, well, what else could be possible? And how much am I carrying that's just an inbuilt unconscious bias, which is making me see the world it is? And how often do I actually stop and try and maybe push open those boundaries a little bit more by inviting people into a conversation, by listening to something that maybe makes me feel a little bit uncomfortable, to try and understand it more so before I dismiss it and say it can't be true or I don't agree. Why do I not just wait a little bit longer to see, well, maybe I might still not agree, but let me learn why they think that way. And that can actually help me discover more about my thinking and whether I truly have a bias or not. But we all have biases. We'd be lying if we said we don't. It's just how much of them do we recognize and how do we attend to them? And if they're helpful, a bias can be helpful, but if it's unhelpful, what am I doing about that? How am I actually kind of trying to make sense of it? And what's my meaning making around it that's helped me create that, that's led me to form that point of view? And how can I try and unpack that to learn more about myself? There's a huge amount that comes in from self-awareness when you're doing that, and self-coaching, in holding yourself in that moment, being present with yourself to unpack more. And that's why I say when we are self-coaching, you'll learn more about yourself than you ever thought you could. That's the beauty of it. And how interesting to know more about yourself, what you're capable of, what you're thinking, where your thinking comes from, how you shape ideas and thoughts, or how you're limited in your understanding and knowledge on particular issues, topics, people, which actually constrains you in having more of a broader, rounded view or understanding of things.
So you're talking a lot around, we're being aware of something, we are, making a positive approach or being proactive towards something. But we still see a lot of people that may understand something, may see something, may have best intentions, but then there's an internal belief that is holding them back. It's based on previous experiences. Yeah. It's based on meaning they've made up of something. It's based on what they can visualize and can see or have seen. Is there anything in this book here, Be Your Own Leadership, around how, and the process you go through around how do we then be able to shift your mindset to avoid things like imposter syndrome, or to not so much avoid, but tackle it, I suppose, in a way, or when we've identified beliefs, how do we overcome those? Or how do we manage those, I should say, because I don't know if you can always remove a limiting belief. I think you can manage it. I'm not sure if you can 100% remove it. So are there strategies in there to help people through this space?
Yes, there are. So in part of when I'm talking about how do you manage your energy, I look at our 4 different capacities: our physical, emotional, our cognitive, and spiritual. And so spiritual could be purpose for you. But when we're looking to emotional and cognitive, it could be that you're actually feeling a particular way because of what you're thinking, the stories that you're telling yourself. And so I do go through some exercises of how you can start to notice the triggers that are causing you to feel a particular way. So if I'm feeling anxious or worried, rather than just being with that emotion and letting that play out for me and push the choices through as a result of that emotion, I can be more mindful and conscious of it, notice it, and understand what is the thinking that's leading to that emotion. Because typically then the emotion leads to a behavior. So if I'm actually aware of the thinking, and I might be thinking I'm not good enough, I'm going to be found out, people, will think I'm useless at what I'm doing. That makes me feel worried and nervous and scared. Therefore, I start to pull back from the opportunities that are presented to me because I don't want people to find out I'm not good enough. Therefore, I'm not getting as many opportunities. So I start to reinforce that thinking, really, I'm not good enough. See, nobody wants to work with you. So I get more and more worried. I pull back even further. So if I can actually start to understand what's the trigger that's causing me to feel that way, how is it helping me, that emotion, or how is it hindering me? What are the automatic negative thoughts that I'm crafting for myself, the stories I'm telling myself? How might I actually move those towards positive enhancing thoughts? So moving from what we call ants to pets. And how can I kind of break free and make some space in my brain to get rid of those ant mounds, which are kind of clogging the pathway thinking, which would otherwise allow me to have some different ways of thinking about myself and the situation I'm in. And it's very much the choices we want to make to have the impact we'd like to have. If those emotions coming from the thinking are helping me, so sometimes we need a little bit of stress, a little bit of arousal to push me towards something, to allow me to react. But it can get dangerous when it goes over, a certain limit. If I'm recognizing, no, I'm heightened now, my anxiety is not just helping me and supporting me just to keep going and have that sense of urgency to get things done, but it's actually beginning to worry me and create fear and distress. I need to question whether that's in aid of me, whether that's helping me or not. And that's why I want people to think about self-coaching, noticing more mindfulness, intentional thinking, and more consciousness of what I'm experiencing. So there's some strategies, there's some exercises within that chapter that people can reference and play out, and some templates that they can actually utilize and create to help and support themselves.
How do we cope when we observe something of ourselves, but then we bring in someone else? We allow someone else, either directly or indirectly, to share feedback to us that may be a direct conflict to what we are observing ourselves. How do we deal with that?
Yeah, that can be uncomfortable, can't it? So I think the first thing is to think about where the feedback is coming from, and then therefore it'll change the way that you might receive it. So typically when people give feedback, most of the time, not always, but most of the time, they're giving it to you with a positive intention. I'm giving you this feedback so you can be more aware, so you can perhaps think about your impact, how you might change, how you might lean into something or otherwise, what you're doing and what's the causal result of what you're doing, so you can take ownership and accountability. So I think of feedback as a gift, right? That I'm actually having somebody, when I'm giving feedback, I'm effectively gifting them feedback. I think of it as a beautiful blue Tiffany's box with a lovely ribbon on top. And inside that box, there's a whole lot of packaging and a gift inside. When you give someone the feedback, they're going to not necessarily just take the gift and put it on the shelf and say thanks. They'll unpack the gift. They'll pull the ribbon. They'll lift the lid. They'll see the wrapping inside, and they still won't necessarily understand what's in the box until they start to work their way through it. So when we're giving feedback, if we can help people by working through the wrapping so that they can see the gem inside, they're more likely to receive it in a way that's positively minded, even if it's in conflict to the type of gift they'd otherwise want to receive.
Yeah.
So I think intention is important, but then also being mindful of, well, what do I have in my control? Am I going to be defensive from the outset? As soon as somebody starts giving me feedback, just, put up my hand, talk to the hand, or just kind of zone out and not really listen to it. Because sometimes if we get feedback and we don't agree with it, we see that's not how I see myself, it couldn't possibly be. I can go and if I can just sit there and take the feedback, hold the gift box, and go to somebody else with it and talk to them about it and say, look, this is the feedback I've received. I'm surprised by it. Do you see this in me, or can you help me unpack this further, because they weren't able to give me enough examples? So it's challenging. Sometimes feedback can be very overwhelming if we're not expecting it and it's not framed in a way to be of support. So I think as a feedback giver, we've got a lot on us where we can do it better. I don't think many people are great at giving feedback. But if we think about, how do I want it to be received? How can I frame it so the person is primed and ready to receive feedback, rather than just walking in and saying, you know what, Craig, I think you're pretty lousy at what you're doing here. It's not going to be very helpful if you do it like this. Well, you're in a bit of shock, right, if somebody comes at you like that. So I could frame it and say, well, Craig, I wanted to talk to you about the way you've been communicating lately. Is now a good time for us to have a chat? And then you can actually start framing yourself to receive the feedback. Oh, okay, I can clear my mind. Or no, it's not okay. Could we talk about it, in half an hour? I'm in the middle of an urgent deadline. But then you have my full attention. So framing is really important. And then I could talk to you by talking to you about the impact of the behaviours I've noticed. So it's much more clear as to what's going on with the feedback, what's resulting from the way I've been acting, thinking, behaving. And then you can help me by giving me an example of where I could move to. So rather than just saying this is no good, this is the poor impact you're having, how about also give me an example of what could be? Maybe if next time when you have a conversation with someone, if you just prepared a couple of dot points for yourself so that you could be thinking about how you could take them on that journey, that would have an impact that they'd be more united and with you in the conversation. How about you try that next time? So I now, in receiving the feedback, I'm not lost as to what do I do with it. I actually have an action plan to take me forward.
Yeah, good. When it comes to choosing your board of directors, and I'm going to use a really good example here right now. So, for instance, the New Zealand All Blacks, the most winningest sports team of all time internationally, and Ian Foster's the current coach. He had been under the tutelage of Sir Steve Hansen, who won 2 World Cups together, and they had Graham Henry before that. Amazing people around him, some of the best in the game when it comes to mentors he could have had possibly around him, went to other sports, really successful people. When he got put into the role of head coach of New Zealand rugby team, he did something we see quite often. So he had a great support network, very self-aware, lots of things going on. But when he went into that leadership role, he put people around him that were just below him. Okay, in their ability, in their what they could bring to the table, and struggled for the first part, to the point where the whole nation was against him. The New Zealand Rugby Board, from my observation and seeing what happened, probably didn't deal with it the best, and created a space where he was able to shift from that to bring in people that were better and more experienced than that, and put people in positions that had way more knowledge, way more experience, way better expertise.
Yeah.
But it took for him to pretty much lose his job, lose his reputation, everything in that situation. And he'd had good people around him, had good self-awareness, been through lots of great practices, etc., to end up in that situation where now they've just won their quarterfinal against Ireland over the weekend, who Ireland was number one in the world, and really look on track to winning the World Cup now. And they've already decided who the next coach is. He and pretty much said, you're not going to be the next coach, and already brought someone in. So they already know who the next coach is. So my question being around, when we select our board of directors, what things are we looking for? I know you were talking about we need a mentor, we need a coach, we need, reciprocal mentor, etc. But what things are we actually looking for?
Yeah. Very fair question, because people can fill those places pretty easily, can't they? And before you know it, you've just got names on a page. But what you need to have are people that you can trust. So you need to be able to build rapport and trust with the individuals so that you know that they're with you and can support you. I think it's also about looking at where you're at in your career. What type of support do you need? So what are the skills that might be useful for you to grow from a mentor? What type of experience might they have that could be interesting and supportive to you as a mentor, as opposed to just someone who's been fabulous? Because there's lots of fabulous people out there, but maybe their level of fabulousness isn't going to support me of where I need to get to. So it's I guess, aligning their strengths, their skills as to where you're at and how they can be in support of you. Sometimes it's also talking to other people to understand what has it been like to work with them. So to hear of people's experience with them, because you might have them down on your board to soon learn that, lovely people, all good intention, but they really just don't have time. They tell you that they can help you, but you'll see them maybe once a quarter, and they're really not having the impact you'd hope. So it's actually also unpacking with the people their level of commitment and availability to the roles that you're asking them to play in, and making sure there's a shared understanding as to what those roles are. So if your coach thinks that they're also your mentor, but you're expecting them to be a coach, not a mentor, that's an important conversation to have. And likewise, the mentor and coach. So I think, it comes back to, what are you looking for in each of those roles? Reputationally, what do you think of that individual, and have you done your due diligence to see if it's the right person, the right fit, the right background in support of you as to where you're at in your career? And also, I guess, having some conversation with them to see whether they are open to seeing where you're in your career and what they can do in support of you, because you can drag them into the room, but if they don't want to be there, it's not going to be particularly helpful. It needs to be, a proper relationship between interested parties.
Yeah. I think we also need to be careful sometimes of, we can see something in someone and we go, that's amazing. I want to understand that, want to replicate that. And you ask them and they're like, I don't know. Yeah. Like they're unable to unpack their natural genius in a way.
Yeah.
I still remember starting Speakers Institute Corporate, and the team were like, you're like amazing at relationship selling. And I'm like, I never heard of it before, so to speak, just about. Like, it was literally totally foreign to me. And they're like, how are you doing what you're doing? Is there like a structure? Is it natural genius? And I'm like, I don't know. Doesn't everyone do this? Like, this is just who I am. This is how I approach things.
Yes.
And to try and unpack that by myself, no idea.
Yes.
No idea. And I'm very self-reflective, very self-aware of things. But when it comes to your what you're naturally good at, and I term it as your natural genius, it is hard to unpack that. And
it could be humility as well that is also sitting there holding you back from actually being able to talk to it in a way where you feel comfortable to say, well, am bloody good at selling and this is how I do it. But you might feel that level of self-consciousness where you just think, but isn't everybody? Or, I don't see what you see. So that's interesting you point that out. It could be that that's something that sometimes pulls people back.
Oh, I'd never had any sales training or anything like that. But the point here is we have to be aware that just because we see someone do something doesn't mean they can help you unpack that.
Yes.
And to kind of not question that, but to kind of check that out and make sure, is this someone that can actually, if you're looking for an area of expertise, for instance, to guide you, to actually understand whether they actually are ready for or have done the work to be able to unpack what you need, or is it just all you're going to be able to do is just observe them in action because they're so damn good at what they do, they don't understand what they're doing.
Exactly. I agree. I think it's a very fair observation.
Yeah. Look, it's been fascinating conversation, but we do have, a couple of questions here which we love to ask our listeners. And we all know smart people have great answers. But the most successful people, sorry?
No pressure.
Yeah. But the most successful people ask great questions. So when was the last time you did something for the first time?
Well, I have to say it was quite recently in relation to writing my book. I've never written a book before. In doing my first ever book, I learned a completely new process of the art of writing. And it took me, and here was a love of learning, of being able to explore something that I thought would be quite obvious. How hard would it be to write a book? Well, I found out that there was a lot to learn. So doing that would be something I've done for the first time.
Brilliant. Were you self-coaching or did you have someone to support you?
I had the wonderful Kelly Irving of the Expert Author community in support in a group coaching capacity, and that was really worthwhile.
A wonderful human being. What is the one question that you would love to solve?
I would love to solve the question around the gender parity gap. I'd love to be able to further unpack and solve why is it that we have such a continuum of a lack of diversity of leadership, particularly gendered leadership, for women who are moving into leadership roles. And I'd love to see the association of that with the fact that at the age that we're looking at, which is usually people in their mid-40s onwards, how it overlays with their life stages of moving into perimenopause and menopause. Is that one of the reasons that's pulling them away from opportunities for leadership? Are we doing enough in support of these people who are transitioning through menopause to help them thrive in the workplace? And how can we close that gap so we can have a broader diversity of leadership, so we can be more innovative and creative and have diverse thinking and have better organizations?
Yeah, it's kind of like phase 2.0 that really challenges us in that area. You go parenthood first for those who go into parenthood, to then into that, that phase of menopause, etc. It's a fascinating area that we really haven't solved yet. And it would be so good. It sounds so simple, sounds so easy. And, but sometimes the easier things that sound easy, they're like, hey, we should be able to solve this, are sometimes the most complex and wicked problems to deal with. For you, what is an inspiring great leader? And who is a great example of this for you?
Well, for me, an inspiring and great leader is somebody who motivates and inspires and has a long-lasting leadership impact, which is positive and enduring. So when they leave the room, the leadership impact continues. And when I was thinking about who I see is a leader who represents that, I'd have to say Zach Mercurio. Zach is a fabulous author. He wrote The Invisible Leader. He's an organisational and development, he's specialised in organisational and leadership development out of Colorado State University, where he's an adjunct professor. And he's focused on the concept of meaning and mattering. How do we make people feel like they matter so that they actually feel more than they simply belong? And I think that's a beautiful new concept that we're just slowly unpacking. And he's bringing a lot of fabulous, inspiring leadership towards that.
Great. Love it. We haven't had that person before, so I love it. It's been a wonderful conversation. How can people learn more about what you do, and what is the best way for people to connect with you?
Well, I am very active on LinkedIn, so with pleasure, please connect with me. I'd love to have a conversation and learn what you're doing and be able to be of support. Also, my book has its own website, KarenSteinCoaching.com, where you'll find out more about me, the podcasts I do, the articles I write, those types of things. So please be in contact at either of those.
Beautiful. And we'll pop those links in the show notes along with how you spell Stein, the Karen's last name, in there as well. So you get that right. So you can make sure you connect to her in the right way. It's been wonderful talking about your journey from being an economics student in your father's class to and the great bond and connection you have with your dad, and I'm sure you have it with your mum as well, but I could really feel that connection with your dad because we did specifically speak about him, to then your journey into really understanding what connected with you, that shift away from family law being an idea to begin with, to going into tax, and then finding your space where you really thought, I can have a greater impact here if I move into the world of coaching, and to see what you've done, but now go out there and help other people who may not have access to an executive coach, who may not have had access to feedback loops previously, or don't quite get that coaching and mentoring they need inside their organization or even in their environment, to how can you actually lead yourself? And what are those principles and practices that you can put in place, from leading as you right through to leading with kindness? And how can you help develop that along the way while also building a really strong personal board of directors? And hopefully it's a board of directors that helps you swim and not sink, like we see in some companies. As you as a leader, we need more inspiring great leaders around the world. And Karen, you're doing a great job in helping instill practices in people who can take what they know, what they understand, but really start to analyze and observe that and be aware of stuff, and to take action so they can have a greater impact on the world in the future. So thank you very much for your time today. It's been an absolute pleasure.
The pleasure's been mine, Craig. Thanks so much for having me.
It's time for you to join the Inspiring Great Leaders movement by visiting craigjohns.com.au. Share this podcast on LinkedIn and be sure to hashtag Inspiring Great Leaders. We would love it if you could leave a review on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. Drop us a line with your feedback and questions, and connect with us on the Craig Johns LinkedIn, Facebook, and Instagram pages. Be sure to check out the next Inspiring Great Leaders podcast, where the ordinary don't belong.